What's up, guys? Chris, otherwise known as Chain Stasis Wellness, coming at you from Train Boston with another wellness moment. This week, I'd like to talk to you about something called habit stacking and how we can use this to make our behaviors stick. If you've watched my videos for a while, you have some idea that our wellness hinges on our ability to maintain these good habits, specifically habits that are leading us towards our goals. You may know this already, but let's take a second to just differentiate and figure out the difference between habits and behaviors. Habits are, quote, a settled or regular tendency or practice, especially ones that are hard to give up. Behaviors are the way in which animals or a person act in response to a particular situation or stimulus. So essentially, habits are something we do often, while behaviors are natural responses. So A happens or is introduced to the person, and B is usually what happens in response to that. Often these two words are used interchangeably, but essentially habits, when done often enough, become behaviors for better or for worse. Now let's take that and describe how the human brain works to explain how we can use it. The brain works by growing through strength training, essentially. That's a simple way of putting it. We get stronger through what's called the SAID principle. We have specific adaptations due to imposed demands, right? So if we impose specific demands or the same tasks over and over again to our brain, the brain forms these neural connections and gets them stronger and thicker, right? It's just like a muscle fiber, okay? If these connections become thick enough, then not only do the tasks require very little thought, we start doing them when introduced to a trigger or associated stimulus. And it becomes unconscious, and these become behaviors, right? So most people are familiar with the Pavlov's dog, right, analogy. Pavlov would ring the bell and his dog would salivate, knowing he's going to get food because he did it often enough. Human beings, we do this all the time, right? For instance, every time I wake up, I'm reaching to turn off my alarm without even thinking about it. Whenever I walk towards the door to head to work, I grab my keys and my cell phone. Don't think about it at all. When I drive to work, I might, for instance, stop at Dunkin' Donuts, or I'll have the urge to stop at Dunkin' Donuts to get my coffee. I don't always do it because I have power over it, but that is my first impulse, right? Someone might also, every time they sit down to watch a sporting event, say a football game or a hockey game, they want to grab chips and beer, and they do it so regularly that just becomes an unconscious thing. But many times we need to actually practice these habits so they can become behaviors. We don't always have negative associations, and sometimes they're somewhere in between. We actually need to practice a lot of things in our life, and sometimes it feels hard, sometimes it doesn't. It just happens naturally. A good example is when you learn to drive your car for the first time. When you first started to learn to drive your car, everything felt new, novel, crazy. You had to think about it. Nothing was normal, right? You might have even been stressed out. You might have been in a stage of alert in your brain. Everything in your brain was highly active, and every new thing made you think harder, work harder, physical even. It wasn't just mental. But eventually you did it often enough. You hit the gas, you hit the brake, you turn the wheel, you turn your blinkers on, that nothing required thought anymore. Eventually it was all based on those responses through stimuli. A leads to B, right? You see a stop sign, you tap the brakes. You see the red lights in the car's brake lights in front of you, you tap the brakes. Whenever you want to change lanes, you turn on your turning signal, you take a look over your shoulder, look at your blind spot, and you turn, right? And it just becomes so practiced, you can probably do it when you're half asleep, barely paying attention to the road, going to work, right? It comes so easy. But we also tend to drive daily. That's why it came easily. Same thing with language learning. We do it every day, but if we don't practice it often, it can fade. And if we practice all the time, it becomes really, really reinforced, and your response becomes reinforced. But what if we want to do something we don't need to do daily, or is something we actually don't enjoy doing? Something that went against our current nature. We are animals driven by instincts after all. Well, this is where habit stacking comes in. Earlier, I mentioned how your brain gets stronger through essentially strength training. Well, with strength training, certain muscles work better if they're paired with exercises activating supporting muscle groups. That's something I do all the time in my realm. Sometimes it can even help my client figure out how to do the movement in general just by turning something on enough that they can't help but feel it. Right? The brain works pretty well with pairing as well. What we do is we pair and group information in a similar fashion to help someone learn something. A good example of this is when you learn phone numbers or your social security number. They're grouped into segments of numbers. Now, there's a very specific reason for that. It's because our brain works better with grouped things. And if you just put your whole phone number with no breaks in it, you'd have a much harder time remembering it. Habits also work very similarly, right? So if you take something, a new task that you're trying to make become a habit or a behavior, and you attach it to something that's very strong already, something you do all the time, it could be anything. It makes it much easier to learn the new task and set it as something that may become a behavior later on. Some good examples with wellness would be like if I turn on my coffee maker, I do that every day, every morning. I take that and make it something I can use as time to take my morning supplements. I put my supplements right next to my coffee maker every morning. Boom, taking that supplement. Every night, a gargle mouthwash. Maybe I use that 1 minute I'm gargling to pack my gym clothes. Every morning, I tie my shoes. Maybe I'm already close to the ground. I get down on the ground and do 5 push-ups. Every day when I get home from work, I get the mail, do 20 jumping jacks. Every day you lie down in bed, get ready for bed, you turn your lights down, take 10 calming, mindful breaths. You could go on forever with these. And basically, we could hit every chain link of wellness, but I'm not going to take that time because you guys probably understand the concept pretty well. I will say as a tip here, it's important to be very specific, right? If it doesn't make sense to do this new task with something else, because like maybe you can't feasibly put your supplements next to your coffee maker, for instance, that won't work out. If it's not specific to what your goal is, it doesn't matter that you're doing it. If it's too difficult to do, it's not something good to do. Don't try to jump into a really difficult task. Make them simple. Make them relevant. We're always going back to that SMART goal thing that I always talk about. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time constrained. Make sure you kind of guide along that line when you're making these things. So what you can do is you can take a log, right? You write down what you do for the day. Try to figure out what are these behaviors. What are the things you do literally every day and you don't even think about it. It might be kind of hard to do this because it's so practiced you don't even think that you do it, right? Write it all down. Get it for at least 3 days and hopefully a weekend day because weekends tend to be different, very different even. And eventually you'll start to notice trends. Sit down and think about these behaviors and think about what you want to add on. Maybe you need to drink more water. Maybe you need to go to bed earlier. Maybe you need to make it easier to go to bed earlier. Maybe you need to exercise a little harder or a little more frequently. Whatever it is, write it down and try to attach these things that lead to it. Don't say, I want to run a marathon. Say, I want to run an extra 10 minutes 3 times a week. Find things to attach that 10-minute run to. Or even find something to like make you want to run by getting your shoes ready ahead of time. Don't bite off more than you can chew or it won't work. But even if you do and it does fail, don't take this as a negative thing that means quit. Make it easier. Find something smaller and go with that. Okay? So eventually you can always attach it back to that SMART goal thing. And if you can't, it's okay. Just try to make it as good as you can. But when you can, you're going to notice it fits really well. Okay? In the beginning, when you do these things, even though they're attached to strong behaviors and they're stacked habits, you'll still need to pay a lot of attention to it. It will still take a little bit of effort, mental and physical in some cases. But after about 3 to 4 weeks, these new habits will become behaviors. You'll start to do them easily paired together, just like brushing your teeth and flossing, hopefully, and or gargling, hopefully, right? Much like weight training, you're going to need to progress these. You're going to need to do what's called overload slowly over time, make them harder, more effective. But it doesn't change. It's really going to be very straightforward. And consistency trumps that intensity every single time. Do it day in, day out, day in, day out. And before you know it, you're going to be where you want to be with your habits and or behaviors. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. Thank you very much for your time. And until next time, be well.